There's a reason why the food system makes us sick. It's not because you're weak, it's not because you don't care, and it's not just bad advice or poor government guidelines. It's something deeper, much more calculated. The modern food system didn't accidentally make people obese, diabetic, inflamed, and addicted. It was built that way by companies who had already perfected the business of addiction. You see, when public pressure and lawsuits started to build up on the tobacco industry, they didn't just give up. They didn't say, well, I guess we'll stop profiting off human suffering. No, they went looking for a new product, one that could reach more people, attract less criticism, and never be taxed or regulated like cigarettes. And they found it, not in nicotine, but in food. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's corporate history. And once you understand how it happened, how they moved from selling addiction through smokes to addiction through snacks, you'll never look at a cereal box the same way again. Because this wasn't an accident. This was hijacking. Long before processed snacks and sugar-filled breakfast cereals, before barcodes and ingredients lists and fortified this and that, people ate food because it was food. There were no labels, no experts telling us what to eat, just animals, salt, fat, fire. And yet somehow the human species thrived. We explored continents, built civilizations, survived famines and ice ages, all without MyPlate, without multivitamins, and definitely without seed oils. Now that's not to say that our ancestors had perfect diets. But they had something that we've almost completely lost. Food that wasn't designed to hijack biology. They weren't eating to manage blood sugar. They weren't snacking between meals. They weren't craving something sweet after every dinner. They just ate when they were hungry. And when they did, the food they ate had just one job: to nourish. And it's easy to forget how recent all this is. The ultra-processed revolution didn't begin thousands of years ago. It wasn't even hundreds of years ago. It started in the 20th century with machines, chemicals, and marketing departments. That's when food started changing its role. From something that sustained us to something that could be scaled, packaged, branded, and sold in infinite variations. And while a lot of people look back and blame the low-fat guidelines and the influence of the sugar industry in the 60s and the 70s, they're missing a bigger shift that happened. Because the real transformation didn't come from inside the food world, it came from the outside. From an industry that already knew how to build repeat customers. An industry that had mastered addiction. An industry that was looking for its next move. The cigarette companies bought your food. In the 1980s, the tobacco industry was in trouble. Smoking rates were falling. Public opinion was turning. Lawsuits were piling up, and warning labels were everywhere. The writing was on the wall, and the big players knew they couldn't sell cigarettes forever. But they didn't shut down. They didn't pivot to something harmless. They went looking for a new market to dominate. One that had massive reach, weak regulation, addicted customers, and zero stigma. At least, not yet. And they found it in your kitchen. It started with Reynolds, the tobacco giant behind Camel and Winston cigarettes. In 1985, they made a bold move. They bought Nabisco. Oreos, Ritz crackers, Chips Ahoy. Suddenly, a cigarette company now owned one of the most iconic food brands in the world. And just like that, RJR Nabisco was born. Not long after this, Philip Morris, another tobacco titan, made its move. They already owned Kraft, but that wasn't enough. So in 2000, they bought Nabisco too. The same company selling Marlboro cigarettes was now selling Lunchables, mac and cheese, and Oreo cookies, and pretty much everything in the center aisles of your grocery store. None of this was random. This was strategic repositioning. You see, these companies were experts at manipulating behavior. They had decades of data on how to addict human beings. And they had the money and the infrastructure to start applying the same model to food. This is the moment where the food system began to change at a structural level, because it was no longer just about adding sugar. It was about replicating the nicotine business model with bliss points, mouthfeel, and engineered cravings. And here's the real kicker. These companies didn't want you to overeat by mistake. They wanted you to feel like you were choosing it. That's what made their plan brilliant and dangerous. The tobacco companies didn't stop selling addiction. They just made it edible. When tobacco companies took over food, they didn't just bring money. They brought the manual. For decades, they had studied human behavior at a level few industries ever had. They knew how to create need. They knew how to manipulate dopamine. And they understood, down to the molecule, how to keep people coming back for more. So when they entered the food industry, they applied the exact same addiction science they'd perfected with cigarettes to cookies, cereals, crackers, sauces, and other snacks. For them, it wasn't about nutrition. It was about formulas. They weren't asking, will this nourish people? Will it satisfy hunger? They were asking, will it make people eat more? Will it light up the brain like nicotine did? And one of the most powerful tools for this was the bliss point. It's the precise combination of sugar, fat, and salt that triggers maximum pleasure in the brain, without triggering satiety. You feel rewarded but never full. You crave more, but you can't say why. They engineered textures too. Mouthfeel, crunch, dissolve rate. Things that seem trivial, but they are calibrated to a science. Even the delay in flavor release was studied. Make it fast enough to reward, but just slow enough to chase the next bite. They had the data too. From cigarettes, they already knew how to manipulate perception. Make it feel like a choice. Add variety to confuse the brain. And use mildness to engineer more usage, not less. Sound familiar? You'll find 30 different flavors of chips, when real food doesn't need 30 different flavors. They had control. These weren't just experiments. They rolled this out over entire product lines. They built in repeat purchase behavior. They replaced real ingredients with engineered fillers and stabilizers. They created products that required no chewing, no cooking, no thinking, just automatic consumption. They even worked with psychologists and neuroscientists to make sure the food acted like a drug, but never looked like one. Because if it looked like a cigarette, you'd resist. But a cookie, a bowl of cereal, a fun-sized snack, that doesn't feel dangerous, that feels normal. And that's part of the genius, not just the science of addiction, but the invisibility of it. You didn't realize what was happening, but they did. We didn't just get fat, we got trapped. Once the addiction model took hold, the results were devastating, but almost no one connected the dots. People started gaining weight, but the advice was, eat less, move more. People developed insulin resistance and were advised to swap sugar for whole grains. Kids were diagnosed with adult-onset diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And all the while, no one stopped to ask why the kids' breakfast looked like a dessert. Because the system was built to explain away the symptoms, never to question the cause. Let's look at a timeline. In the 1960s and 70s, obesity rates were relatively stable. Type 2 diabetes was rare in children. Heart disease was rising, but no one thought that food addiction was the culprit. Then, right around the time the tobacco companies bought into the food industry, everything changed. Between 1980 and today, obesity rates more than tripled. Type 2 diabetes exploded. Autoimmune disease, fatty liver, PCOS, anxiety, depression, all became commonplace. And it didn't just happen in one country. It happened everywhere the Western food model was exported. You see, the brilliance of a system like this, they made you sick and you blamed yourself. They sold you addiction and they called it convenience. They engineered your cravings and they told you to have more willpower. And it's hard to overstate just how damaging that is. Because when you think it's your fault and you constantly blaming yourself, you never stop to question the food. You go on another diet, you try another workout, you count another calorie, and you keep buying the same products from the same companies, just with different labels. Even when the consequences are obvious. People who follow the rules still gain weight. People eat the same heart-healthy foods but still end up in the cardiologist's office. Children develop insulin resistance and fatty liver disease before they reach puberty. And the system stays the same because the system is working exactly as it was designed. Not to make you healthy, but to keep you hooked. Sick enough to need their solutions, but not so sick that you stop functioning as a customer. This was never about health. If it was about health, it would have worked by now. We've spent decades following the rules. Low fat, high fiber, heart-healthy whole grains. Seed oils instead of butter. Snack bars instead of steak. We trusted the experts, we followed the guidelines. And we got sicker anyway. Obesity didn't go down. Type 2 diabetes didn't go down. Medication use didn't go down. So ask yourself this. Why didn't they change course? If it was really about health, if these were really honest mistakes, wouldn't they have corrected them by now? They haven't because the system isn't broken. It's just not built for you. It's built for the companies that process food, the institutions that endorse this, and the industries that profit off the aftermath. Real food doesn't need a marketing team. It doesn't come in 17 flavors. It doesn't come in a box with loads of health claims. And it doesn't sponsor sporting events or fund nutrition conferences. Because real food isn't a product. Its IP isn't owned by a corporation. It doesn't rely on shelf stability, emulsifiers, or seasonal brand refreshes. It just exists. It nourishes. And when people eat it, really eat it, something strange happens. They stop needing the system. This is the quiet revolution that's been growing under the surface. People rediscovering what food is. Not for weight loss, not for trends, not for macros, but because they're tired of being manipulated. People realizing that maybe the problem isn't their metabolism. Maybe it's the ultra-processed sludge being passed off as breakfast. That maybe the solution isn't another supplement or drug, but something that's been here all along. You see it in those going full carnivore, or keto, or paleo, or those that just walk away from the cereal aisle altogether. You see it in the testimonials. People reversing type 2 diabetes, dropping weight, getting off medications. People healing skin, mood, autoimmune conditions, sometimes within days. You don't need to agree with the diet that someone chooses. But you can't ignore this common thread. When they stop eating fake food, their bodies remember how to heal. And that's something the system can't replicate. They can't patent a ribeye. They can't bottle the human satiety response. They definitely can't run ads for no ingredients. That's why real food is a threat, because it removes the need for all the systems built around the dysfunction. And it exposes the lie they've spent decades protecting. That you're broken, that you need them, that there is no other way. But there is another way, and thousands of people are proving it just by eating real food. To discover the other forces that got us here, watch this video next.